It was sheer laziness, really. I swear that was it. I got so many, when I first started writing, I would get so many letters from people who, they had an idea for a story, they didn't know what to do, they didn't know how to get an agent, they didn't know how the publishing world worked. And when I initially started, I just basically went to the local bookstore and bought books on publishing and editing and things like that. And I guess I assumed that that would be the first step that most people would take. But no, the first step is to write me and ask. So I was getting so many questions. They were often the same thing. And so I just designed a small section of the website that talks a little bit about the things I didn't learn in the books, and the importance of, if you want to be a writer, that you have to read, for instance, and you have to know about the publishing industry. And I told a story about how I got my agent and those types of things. I even posted the query letter I wrote, which actually had a pretty good response rate when it was sent out to agents. You know, most agents, you'll read in these little books that they reject, I think it's something like 99% of everything that comes through the door. I think mine, I sent it out to 25 agents, and I had 12 positive responses from it. But you know, it's one thing to say this or for this to be common knowledge, but it's another thing for people to actually read the letter that I wrote and to understand why it works. So I tried to put a little bit of that type of information in there. I think the most important thing, if you really want to be a writer, is to know what that means to you. What does that mean? It's real easy to say, well, I want my books to sell, 25 million copies each, and I want them to win the Pulitzer and the Nobel Prize twice because it's so good. All of this is great, but what kind of writer do you want to be? Do you want to be a thriller writer? Do you want to write the kind of novels that I write? Are you interested in science fiction? What are you? And I think that that is the most important thing that a writer needs to know, because by making some of these choices, you're also making some choices about, let's say, publicity and marketing, even haphazard. For instance, a thriller generally will get a bigger marketing budget, for instance, than a Western. It's just the way the publishing world is working now. So if you want the Western, but you want a big publicity thing, well, these two aren't really going together right now. That would be an example. So be very clear on what you want. Do you want to write commercial fiction? Do you want to write a novel that will eventually be adapted into Cliff Notes? Or what is your goal? I think once you're clear on that, then what you should do is really learn what makes that particular genre work. I mean, if you're going to write a thriller, for instance, well, you should know a little bit about thrillers. You might want to read 25 or 50 of them. You find out how many chapters there are, how many pages there are, how many characters are there. When are the thriller elements introduced? Is it primarily narrative? Is it primarily dialogue? Once you read about 50 of these, you kind of get a knack for how the whole process works, and then you can go ahead and come up with your story and write your novel. Well, that's hard. You vary everything else, essentially. You vary as much as you can. You vary the characters, you vary the dilemmas, you vary the narrative style, whether it's first person or third person limited, omniscient. You vary the length of the novel. You change virtually everything else within the novel that you can. And I think that that is probably the most challenging part, especially once you into, I don't know how many books I've written, 14 or 15, whatever the number is. Once you get up into that kind of number, it does get a little tough to write about characters that you haven't written before. But you do your best to do it over and do it new. I believe that most of the novels have some sort of topics worthy of discussion on a number of levels, whether you want to discuss structure or character or narrative style or the plot in general or the meaning behind that. It's really hard to say, basically. You might say something like, well, probably one of the longer novels, like, let's say, A Bend in the Road or The Rescue. These deal with a lot of great issues. If you look at A Bend in the Road, you're really dealing with the theme of forgiveness and whether it's really possible. And you could talk on and on about something like that, but I can't necessarily say that that's more interesting than something like talking about the dilemmas posed in Dear John, for instance. It just, I suppose, depends on who you are and what your book group is interested in reading in. I have found, however, that most people generally read, or they're most interested in characters that, at least in a small way, remind them of themselves. So, you know, perhaps maybe you look at the ages of the characters portrayed in the novel and start with something like that. I don't know what to think, really. I don't know that it's unprecedented. I think Stephen King has something like 40 some odd books, you know, that have been, or short stories that have been adapted into film. So that might have happened sometime, I guess, over an 18-month period. But it is, it's kind of exciting. You know, I'm really thrilled, and I was very pleased. I think that the novels that are being made into film I think they'll be pretty popular. I mean, I think they're fairly good stories. I think people will really like them. They are Dear John, The Lucky One, and The Last Song. So we'll see how it goes. Every day is something new in this industry, and I've been very blessed. I'm the first one to admit that. My wife, my children, God, and after that, I don't know. I watch a lot of Seinfeld. I think that inspires me. I mean, I'll put that on when I'm writing, and it usually helps for whatever reason. It varies. That's one of the things that people probably don't know about me, is that I always have a small DVD player sitting on my desk, and every day when I sit down to write, I turn it on, and I only watch things that I've seen numerous times before. I'll watch Star Trek: The Next Generation, or I'll watch The Twilight Zone, or I'll watch Seinfeld, or I'll watch Law & Order Special Victims Unit. And I've seen all of the episodes like 10 times, which is why I put these on. Because if I haven't seen them, then I'd want to watch the show. It's much better to just have this very familiar sound in the background that I can look up when I need a moment's pause. Like, oh, this is kind of funny, I'll watch this for a minute. Then you go back to writing. It provides an automatic temporary relief. Plus, it keeps me from getting too lonesome, because when you're holed up in an office for long stretches, for long periods of time, believe it or not, it can get pretty boring otherwise. As far as the 21st century to the 20th century to the 19th or the 18th or all the way back, in the end, literature always comes down to a good story, and you have to tell the story very well. I don't know that that's going to change that much, whether it's going to be in print or whether it's going to be in electronic. I think if you're worried about whether that, I mean, as a publisher perhaps you're interested, but as a writer, certainly I think you just concentrate on doing the best job that you can, telling the best story that you can, developing characters very well, you know, being appropriate in your pacing and your structure, and choose your voice carefully, and just keep the pages turning, whether they're electronic or whether they're old-fashioned paper. I think if you do that, you know, I think that there'll always be room in the market for you. Listening to stories, reading stories has been part of the human experience ever since the written word was first put down on tablets, I guess.